Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Dean Clayton, and welcome to SMAX 2022. On today's session, we are going through we're going to focus on request management. So following on from the session that we did yesterday with Carl and Pete, who did a fantastic introductory to getting started with SMAX and covered obviously a lot of topics related to request management. With this session and what we hope will be a continuing series that will eventually do additional content on demand, we're going to look and do a bit more of a dive onto request management and the different request management types and some of the rules and things around that. So we've got a lot of content to get through today. In fact, I had to pull some of the content out because there was so much that we wanted to cover, but we'll make sure that's available on demand as we go forward. But first, I wanted to do a quick introduction to out-of-the-box SMAX modules, and just to kind of help clarify and set up everything related to what's included with SMAX and what's not included with SMAX. Because we noticed we've got a few people asking those kind of questions because with something like SMAX Timber, it's obviously going to be a bit new to them. So we thought we'd do a quick cover of all that with you. So when we talk about SMAX and the capabilities that SMAX is the core of our overall ESM solutions that we provide for Micro Focus. It includes all IT service management and IT asset management. And when we talk about asset management, we also talk about that from a hardware perspective or even a software perspective. But there's three main primary license approaches that can be purchased with SMAX. So we have SMAX Express, which focuses on those IT service management capabilities. We have AMX, which is our, should we say, experience for the focus on IT asset management. And then we have SMAX Premium, which basically includes all of the above. And of course, I made the note there as well. We also have HCMX, which utilizes the SMAX platform. And you can find out more about that on our session on Thursday, the 15th. They'll be hosted by my good colleague, Alex. Okay, so that's in terms of the three variants, just so people understand those. And then we wanted to talk about those out-of-the-box modules as well, what is included with those modules. So in this diagram here, I've put a quick picture of the modules which are included with SMAX Express. So you can see under our plan, build, run approach to out-of-the-box modules, you're covering your service catalog, everything related to the service portal, of course. You've also got time periods and service level management as part of that. Then in the under build, you've got your change, release, knowledge, SACM, so service asset and configuration management, because that's the core of any IT service management solution, and of course survey management as well. And you'll notice there on the left-hand side, we also include vendor, because that's key to part of that SACM module as well, understanding the various vendors that are providing your assets. Then under run, we have obviously our service request module, which is what we're going to talk about today, incident problem, and on-call schedule as well. And all these features you can find in details about in our documentation. You'll also note on the right-hand side, we've got dashboard, tasks, approvals, reports, and service portal. And that's something that's available irrespective of the modules, the licensing that you choose. So, we're not going to talk about those specifically, but I just wanted to call that out on this particular slide. Then when we look at AMX and we look at that ITAM, you can see there's a little bit of an overlap because we've got the catalog and we've got knowledge and service request. And that's because, again, with AMX, we provide that portal functionality, so you can manage your subscriptions and the assets that you own or people within your organization own. But then it's more focused on that IT asset management capability on the back end. So looking at that, managing your contracts, and obviously again, vendors with that, procurement, software asset management, financials, they're all part, and again, that life cycle of your configuration items, your assets and your devices and your services, all part of that overall picture. But we also include some of our other more interesting modules within SMAX, and that's our application portfolio, project and program, and also idea and proposal. Then when we look at premium, well, as you can see, it's absolutely everything. So there's no restriction with a SMAX Premium, and you get all of those capabilities out of the box with it. So we just wanted to highlight the differences between the three. One other thing to note, as I said, all those items that are in the blue, the dashboard, tasks, approvals, reports, and service portal. Similarly, under administration, which I'm not showing in the menu, that also includes pretty much common aspects that are available to all of those different licensed options. And the main one of that is Studio. And under Studio, you have the ability to create your own apps. And that's available in all different versions of SMAX for free. It's included as part of the product. And that's part of why we do things like the SMAX App Challenge, getting you to build out your own workflows and being able to create them for what you need within the business. Okay, so that was a little touch point overall, and hopefully that helps with some of you raise some of the questions, maybe very new to SMAX and what we do within Micro Focus. So let's get back to helping end users and look at that service request module and what that includes and what that's all about. So the service request module is used for handling customer-facing inquiries for assistance. I'm deliberately using the word assistance here because it could be where they're asking for something, right? You know, I need a new laptop. I want to get access to something. But it could also be that they need some kind of support. You know, it could be, should we say, some kind of inquiry, maybe something's not working, or where do they need to go for something, or you know, maybe they want to make a complaint. You know, you've got that broad range of, should we say, customer service that you need to provide from a single module. And the service request module utilizes that request record entity to help drive that through. Wait. Entity, that's correct. So entity is a term that we use to refer to the different record types in SMAX. So it's one of those words that we've used across the board to try and help avoid confusion. Because if you start using the word records, people can get confused between, oh, I'm working on this record or that record, or these are all the records in my view. Whereas entity, we want to talk about the actual type of records that are there. And when you're configuring business rules, either in offerings, models, or within the main administration area in Studio, you'll see that we use entity a lot of the time to refer to the record that rule is being triggered from. So you'll see that when we look at the session that we've got planned for Thursday, and we're looking at some of the SMAX administration, you'll see the use of entity quite a lot as part of that. So it's just to help give you that little bit of extra knowledge. Okay, so back to those requests. So when it comes to requests, we actually have 4 types within SMAX. We have service request, support request, HR support request, and cart request. And each of these different types of requests only have one workflow. Yeah, one workflow. And this is something that I thought would be quite interesting to highlight, because a lot of people, when they come new to SMAX, they kind of go, well, I need to build out specific workflows because of the different activities we need to do within the business. And a lot of that comes to be driven by the ways of working they've had within the existing products they've used within their organization. So one workflow, that's, as I like to call it, our SMAX ways of working, or our WOW. And one of the couple of points we like to say when we talk about SMAX ways of working, it's about adopting the out of the box and then adapting it to fit your business need. If we think about it in terms of, should we say, ITIL, ITIL going all the way back to the early 90s, even back to version 1, was always this concept about having process, people, and technology all working together equally. And I think what I've certainly seen in my history around service management over the last 22 years, which now makes me feel really old, is that there's been various different times through that where people have heavily leaned into one way or another. So in some cases, we've heavily gone into that process level type setup, which has meant that a lot of times you end up having to really heavily customize the technology. So that then has a problem, because you're then into the world of having to manage your upgrades? How do you consume new capability comes from your vendor? And it really, makes it more complex. So I think not just for us, but for other vendors as well, there's definitely a more swing back to kind of sort of say, well, look, we've been around the business for quite a long time. We've got significant amount of best practices and should we say designs and ways of working within the products as is that you can utilize to help take a quick step and move faster and get set up a lot easier. And then, of course, there's that need to adapt that because not every business is exactly the same. I think when we talk about certain processes like incident management or in general at that high level service request management, we all kind of want to work in the same way. But it's the little intricate details is where things start to change. And that's partly how we look at it as well. So that high level workflow is the same across the record type, okay, whether it's a service request or a support request or one of the other types. And then you add that extra layer of detail using other options within the product. And this overall reduces the overall complexity and the overhead for administrators because it means you can standardize the way that you're working and then potentially shift left and get people like your catalog administrators or your service process owners to take responsibility for the ways of working and the adapting to what the business needs. Whenever I talk about this, I always like to bring up the economist from the early 1920s, John Maynard Keynes, who actually had this quote, which I think is really apt when it comes to pretty much adapting and adopting anything new in the world. And it's really, for me, and I think a lot of times when I'm talking to customers about how you grasp that new idea, and it's that's the easy bit. The problem is it's always trying to get away from the old school thinking that you may have. Just because you've done something for so long in a particular way doesn't necessarily mean that it's correct. Some of it could be really useful, but it's about how you then utilize that and bring it forward without impacting the way you want to go. So thinking about all those activities required for a particular types of requests, that you have within the business, say as onboarding users or, managing delivery of a PC, for example, how do you do that? Well, that's all about task fulfillment plans. Okay. And in regards to that, some of that was covered on the Getting Started session that we ran yesterday, but look for more details on fulfillment plans and an upcoming on-demand content that we'll be bringing over the next couple of weeks. Okay, so let's go back to that service request module. So as we said, it's used to handle customer-facing inquiries and uses the request record entity. And we've got those 4 types. So let's look at those 4 types in a little bit more detail. When we think about a service request, that's typically your predefined activities and possibly requires some kind of approval. So it's something where someone's asking for something potentially new or asking for a change. They know what they want. Or maybe they might not know what they want, but you know how best to give them what they need. So good examples here, increasing the size of a mailbox, right? Then my mailbox only has, let's say, 5 gig, and I'm having issues with storing my email, and I need to increase it. That typically would be a service request where you've got the capability, you could standardize and even automate that overall setup for it. And it might need some approval, maybe because of the cost involved. About a user that's leaving an organization. That again would be a typical service request because as part of that leavers process, there's a standard set of activities that will need to occur. Things like returning equipment, signing off things with HR, maybe handing in an ID badge back to security. Again, requesting access to a VPN, something that probably would be automated in the background, or even ordering a coffee. At the end of the day, that's something that is, as we were shown yesterday by Carl and Pete, something that is a very good classic service request that you can have. The other thing to note as well is service requests records, when they're created, can only be raised if they have an offering in the service catalog. So you have to have an offering there. If not, it's going to create a support request. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail shortly. So let's look at that high-level workflow for a service request. So the service workflow goes through a fairly standard approach. You have the classification metaphase, as we like to call it. So if you look at those top layers that we've got there, we've got classification, approval, fulfillment, validation, and done. Those are what an end user sees in the end user portal, the dots that they see lined up against their ticket, so they can get an idea where they are in the overall flow of that particular ticket. So typically classification is normally that log phase. There's then obviously an approval, and it might not happen in all occasions. There could be situations where you don't need an approval, whereas other request types, you might want to have that approval. Then we've got that fulfillment. So going back to those task plans, that fulfillment task plans, that's where they will be implemented. And you would have that to do all the actual work and activity that's needed as part of that request. We then get into that validation phase, which is all about acceptance and potential review. So with any request, and if we think about this from a classic customer service type situation, even outside of IT, typically there's that kind of call and response type situation where you try to fulfill that request that customer has, whether that's they ask you for a particular, let's say they ask you for a latte. You provide them that latte, and if they're happy, they go thanks, and they walk off with their drink. But if maybe you've given them hot chocolate, then you're into the world of, obviously you probably want to go into some kind of review phase and figure out what needs to be done. And it may be in that kind of situation you've got to go back around the loop, or it might be that you can deal with it there and then just close the ticket down. And of course, there's always that option of abandoning a ticket as well. If we think about it from a customer perspective, there are going to be times where maybe they've changed their minds, right? Go back to that coffee example. I walk in, I go and order a coffee, and then actually I decide I don't have time, I need to get away, or maybe I don't want the drink anymore, and I'll ask for a refund and I'll walk away. Similarly, that can happen in an IT world as well. So it's always something you need to be able to have that trap for handling that. Now, this is the out of the box workflow, and we're going to show some more as we go on, but you can modify this within our SMAX Studio configuration should you need to do so. Now, a little bit more extra detail over on top of that, and this is a bit of a simplified view, so it's not including absolutely everything, but I wanted to highlight some of the automation that we have within SMAX out of the box to help speed up the fulfillment and also the amount of activity that's required by an individual that's working on a ticket. After all, if I was an agent and I need to work on tickets, I don't particularly want to have to, with every ticket, mark it as, set a status value or move it on to the next phase within its life cycle. If there's an opportunity for the system to recognize, based on me populating data in certain fields, to do that automatically for me, that's going to be a big win. And over time, might that only be 1 or 2 seconds per, should we say, record that I'm working on? Over time, that increases up to several seconds a day, several minutes a week, several hours, potentially a month. Multiply that by the amount of people that's working across your IT support and the rest of your organization. It's a big productivity improvement overall. So let's have a look at some of those that we've got in there. So as you can see here, with the service request workflow, if there is an approval, when the ticket is logged and submitted, if there's an approval, it will automatically go into the approval phase, where it will wait for that approval to occur. Then, based on that approval, it will then decide whether it's going to go straight to close because it's been denied, or in the case where it's been successfully approved, it'll move on to that fulfillment stage for it to be worked on. Of course, if there is no approval, it will automatically go to fulfill through that other route that we have there, that other transition that exists. After fulfillment, and again, you've got that task, all those tasks plans that you've defined to deliver this, irrespective of how simple or complex that overall workflow offering is. We've then got that acceptance phase. And as you can see here, we drive it in a way whereby you automatically move to that user acceptance based on the completion code and the solution being populated. So again, go back to what I said a moment ago. I'm not having to set a status to resolve, or I'm not having to say, I've resolved this. I'm literally typing in my solution. I'm typing in selecting a completion code value, which can certainly be used for reporting. But by setting those two, it's instantly moving me forward. And that moves into that accept phase where we're expecting an input from the user. Now, as part of this, and we're not really going to talk about notifications in SMAX, but typically what would happen at this point is that user would get a notification to say, hey, we feel like we've resolved your issue, we've fulfilled your request for you, and you got the opportunity to accept or reject that. Now, if they reject that, that will move it to the review phase for it to be manually picked up by an agent for on the support side to work on that particular case. If they accept it, then obviously it moves to close. But there's a couple of extra rules that we've got around here as part of it. So you can see we've got in that little green there, that auto close after 2 days. There's an out-of-the-box schedule rule that runs that basically says, starts the clock, and after 2 working days, will automatically, so a 48-hour period, would automatically move it to close. Because if we think about it from a user perspective, they're always busy, right? They've reached out because they need some assistance. They want from us. They may not have the time, to come back and say thank you all the time. We of course would like them to, but it doesn't happen always the case. And we don't want that ticket to sit there in, should we say, a resolved but should we say active ticket. So that allows that ticket to be automatically closed after that 2 days. Again, that's something that you can configure within your own system quite easily. It's just a single business rule that can be modified, and you could change the length of time, or even maybe remove that if that's something that you feel within your organization. One other thing that I want to mention at this point, though, is within the service catalog, and it'll be something that we'll mention on a similar topic where we'll look at the catalog and catalog offerings, is there is the ability to skip user acceptance. So for some types of service requests, maybe there is no need to get them to accept it because maybe you're just doing an update to an account. Maybe you're giving them access to something and sending them an automated email with their connection details. In that kind of scenario, you can have it set in your offering to skip that user acceptance, and then that would automatically pass through from fulfill through to closure. Okay, so that's kind of giving you a bit of a high-level overview on the workflow around services and talked about some of that automation, process automation we have within the product. Now, I mentioned approvals a few times. So how do we define an approval? Well, similar to task fulfillment plans, we have a concept of approval plans or a governance approval plan. And we'll look to try and provide more details around approval plans in one of our upcoming on-demand content. But to give a high-level overview of them, just so it helps cement it in this case for you, approval plans are defined within your catalog offering. So a good example of that is, say, a line manager approval for a new laptop, right? Maybe you give a choice between should we say, a travel-friendly laptop or maybe something a bit more performance-related. Or maybe you have, you maybe say with mobile phones, right? It may be there's a standard corporate mobile phone, or if the user has been onboarded wants to use their own mobile phone, it might be something that the line manager has to approve. So you can build that into your actual approval and have an approval plan for the specific offering related to that. Then you also have a governance approval plan as well. Now, this is something that is more broad reaching. So this is across all requests, or at least all service requests. And this would be applied every time. Okay, so a good example of this, again, think about it from a financial planning perspective, right? It may be that any requests that require or has a cost impact to the company may need someone within the finance business, hopefully not the CFO every time, to sign off on and do the approval within the system. So from our point of view, you've got that mix between the two. Now, the governance approval plan applies to all service requests automatically and occurs before any approval plan defined on the catalog offering. So you can have a situation where both approval plans, the governance approval plan and one specific for a service request, get applied at the same time. Look, don't worry, you can add conditions into your approval, so you can bypass them if you do that. And we'll talk about that in a bit in one of our other sessions that we've got planned. Okay, so that's service requests. Let's now look at support requests. Hopefully we can go through these a little bit quicker now because you started to understand some of the terminology. So support requests are very much in the world of that user has some kind of issue. So I can't access my email. I'm unable to print at a specific printer. Can't connect to a VPN, or I'm unhappy with my coffee. These are all classic examples of a support request within SMAX. And of course, if a generic request is raised within the service portal, it will always be considered a support request type, unless, of course, it's later identified that it should be delivered as a service request. Now, when we look at that support workflow, you can actually see, although it looks a little bit more complicated and there's a few more transitions in there, it's actually very similar to what we've just seen. We've got that log and classify up front. At the far end, we've got the accept, review, close, and abandon. It's exactly the same setup. The difference is where before we had approval and fulfill, this time we've got a first line support and an escalate phase. So you've got the ability to handle, should we say, assignment to a first line team for them to go and do and investigate on what needs to be done. And then also the need to escalate should it be required. And again, if we look at that simplified view of some of that automation, we've got exactly the same kind of automation occurring. We've got that automatic transition between log and classify. Based on it being set up for an assignment, we've got that set up so it will then move through to first line support. Okay. And then once there's an ability to then escalate manually, but in terms of if it's, should we say, resolved, so the completion code and the solution has been populated either in first line support or in escalate, it will move to that accept phase in exactly the same way as we talked about before, with exactly the same set of rules and actions set up with the ability to go to review and the ability for auto closing as well. And again, from a customer perspective, if the user marks it as solved themselves, or perhaps, which is more likely to happen in the support world, because sometimes maybe, they raise, I've got problems with your email, and then they'll close the ticket set, or should we say abandon the ticket because actually their network connections come back and they're all fine and there's no action on IT support. That allows it to abandon and close out as well. Now, some of you might be asking, isn't that an incident? And it's a good point to raise. But remember, don't confuse process with record types. From our perspective, and we've covered this a little bit in the Getting Started with SMAX webinar session available on demand, and we've got some additional content online that you can read up around this. But I've tried to boil this down and keep this quite simple for you. A support request is anything that's raised against an end user and initiated by that customer, by that end user. Okay, so as we said, they're going to do it on the portal or maybe contacting the service desk. An incident, on the other hand, is typically raised against a service or a CI. Think about it, some kind of outage or disruption of service has occurred, and it's typically raised by the service provider. Normally maybe by some kind of event monitoring solution that's put in place, or it could be by a second line engineer, someone within support who's identified something whilst looking at tickets that they've got. Support requests and incidents, an incident typically records should be raised for that unplanned service interruptions. And you could also have situations where incidents could exist where there's actually no perceived impact to end users. Maybe it's some kind of backup system that no one's really using at the end user perspective. In a mature organization, you would also hope that if you've got a decent monitoring in place and set up, that any incidents will get created prior to a support request. You could have a situation where a support request could become an incident record, and that can happen typically maybe if you're in a less mature organization, or you get a large number of users contact the service desk initially, and at that point someone goes, do you know what, we think we've got an incident here, so let's create an incident record as a parent for all those support requests. The advantage again here is for your second line support. They can focus on the incident, work on the actual one ticket to try and get it resolved. And then because those support requests would be related to that incident, Once the incident is resolved, that resolution is automatically passed down to the support requests and updates the support requests with the end users to say, hey, we think we've solved this, and we'll move it to the accept reject phase for them to check whether they're happy that the issue has been resolved. Now, of course, there's always going to be the odd occasion where, should we say, a support request gets attached to an incident because it sounds like it's related. Let's say the mail server's gone down and the user contacts the desk and says, I'm having a few issues with accessing mail. Mail service is restored. That user actually rejects it because maybe they've got another issue with their laptop. And that's fine, because that review cycle that we showed earlier allows you to then go back around the loop and look after that particular end user. I thought I'd put a couple of examples here just to kind of help cement that idea within your head as well. So the first one is a user's forgotten their password for a SAP application. Typically, password resets are considered service requests because you can totally automate that solution. And this is a really good example of where automation through a task fulfillment plan can help you. Next example, whereas a user can't connect to a SAP application and is something that's more on the end user side about a proxy definition set up on their machine. That is a classic support request. Doesn't need to create an incident because there's no outgoing issue with the SAP service. This is all something specific to that end user. So therefore, it doesn't need to be turned into an incident record and can be handled at that support request layer. Next, event management detects that one of the servers in the SAP application has crashed. Redundancies to keep the application online, but users are taking longer than normal to log in. This is a classic incident record. Okay, you're going to get there, you've had a service disruption, there's a performance impact, but the service is still available. So you're going to use that incident to try and make sure that service is restored properly to how it should be. And it might end up leading into maybe some kind of problem management as well. But that's obviously a topic for another time. And then this final one, user calls in reporting they're taking a long time to log into the SAP application. This is that example of utilizing, having that support request for that specific individual and then linking it to that incident record, so that once that service is restored, their support record can be automatically moved to that acceptance phase, so that the second line engineer who ever working on an incident doesn't need to go and update every single ticket. All right. And that hopefully helps reduce the overall overhead on your agents within the system. Okay. I think the other thing to note here as well is, as we said, is you're going to do that relation there. So I put this in as a little bit extra example that we just covered. Now, for more information on support requests and incidents, we actually, as we say, we mentioned it yesterday's session, but we've also got it in our online documentation. Hopefully, with the way this webinar works, you should be able to click on that link and go and read up on that topic in more detail. Okay, so we've covered service and we've covered support requests. What about HR support requests? Well, this was an additional workflow that we've added and primarily to cater to HR processes. Within the out-of-the-box setup of SMAX, one of the things that we looked at was we started to look at, should we say, content specific for specific lines of business in that, should we say, enterprise service management space, where you're taking your IT service management capabilities and broadening that across the rest of the organization. So we decided to create an additional workflow, and because that first setup of content that we've created relates back to HR, we decided to label that within the system at the moment as HR support requests. This has obviously a separate process to what we've seen with service and support, and it doesn't include an approval or an end user phase. In fact, if we look at it, it's a very simplified process flow. And part of the reason for doing that is because we wanted it to be generic enough so that you could utilize it where there was maybe requirements in other lines of business that maybe doesn't fit into exactly the same model of service and support requests that you predominantly would see across IT. If we look at it around that automation, though, again, we've got that automation kicked in there as part of it. So there's an automatic transition from log to classify as long as it's been accepted. We also then move it through, once assignment is added, through to that process phase, which is where you're going to be dealing with any kind of fulfillment and have, again, some kind of task plan. And likewise, we got that ability to close or abandon as part of it. So it is not overall more simplistic process, but it also maybe is ripe for where within your organization, you might have some more complexity in HR or maybe another line of business where you might want to extend out this capability. Now, I guess one question you could ask yourself is, should you be using the HR support workflow in your organization? And there is no real right or wrong answer to this. It really depends on the way that your organization works. A significant number of our SMAX customers actually utilize the service and support request workflows and treat a line of business like HR, like facilities or legal or sales as just another support team. Now, they may have some additional controls in place and using things like some of our restrictions that we can put in the system around confidential requests or data domains, which block who can actually see the ticket on either side of the interface to help restrict and avoid situations where maybe someone not having access to HR content or tickets that they shouldn't have. But it really does depend on the way the ways of working with your organization. I think in general, the way that I've certainly seen it is typically look at broadening out from that service and support request type initially and look to see if that's suitable fit for the lines of business. And then if not, then there's that opportunity to review and see if there's that HR support option in there for you afterwards. The final request type that we want to talk about is cart requests. Now, this is a special locked workflow, and it's designed to act as a parent record when user generates multiple requests together in submission. Sorry about that. Cart requests are only created if a user submits a cart. Individual requests in a cart do not advance past the log phase until that cart workflow is completed. And typically that cart workflow includes that governance approval, as we talked about earlier, that was defined on the request entity. In the event that approval has been denied, all the associated requests will be automatically closed. And when I say all the requests, I'm referring to the service requests that are part of that. All the support requests will obviously carry on as normal. Cart functionality is enabled or disabled as a self-service portal feature setting, so it's not something you can have it turned off. And again, as a workflow, so you can see from here, it's a very simplistic workflow. You've got that log, approve, and close, and it's an automated process going through those as all the tickets that are generated are done as part of it. Typically, carts, and again, you've got that governance approval, and I think the cart workflow can be quite useful. Maybe if you're a line manager and you maybe want to create multiple records for people within your team, and you're requesting on behalf of multiple people within your organization. Again, like HR, should you use a shopping cart in your organization? Again, there is no right and wrong answer on this one, and it really does depend. Cart requests, we have a number of customers that actually don't enable cart functionality. They leave it switched off and basically allow customers to submit each of their requests individually. If you think about it from a user perspective and how they're using the portal, actually, when you're filling out that request and clicking submit, then you're going to get it sent off for someone to deal with it there and then. The add cart function adds an extra step for that end user. So for some people, that has a little bit of an impact in the ways of working and makes it a little bit more complex for their end users. So maybe that customer experience isn't that great, but it's something that you can offer should you want to your end users. Okay, so last topic that I wanted to cover as part of this is about roles. So roles are assigned to users, giving them access to various capabilities in SMAX. All users are given the self-service portal role. This allows them to access the self-service portal and perform all activities that you can see: ordering from the catalog, searching knowledge. If you've got the capability around idea management or the Q&A module, the Ask Friends capability, accessing those. Similarly, doing surveys or even approvals. All of those can be done, and they don't consume a license in the way that SMAX is set up, as long as it's all done through the end user portal. A user, though, can be given any number of roles, so they're additive. Okay, so if you give a user multiple roles, they will get all that combined capability when they log into the system. And roles can also be applied to a group. So you can, should we say, apply a role to a particular group, let's say a support team, a support group, and all the people that get added into that group automatically inherit the roles associated with that group, allowing them to be able to, without you having to do overhead of management and assigning roles to individual users. And that can be a really good, useful benefit to you. But what's the difference between a user and a contact? So these are just two types of person records. And sometimes we interchange the usage of the word person and user when we're talking in SMAX. But I thought it was good to cut this out. The underlying record that we have in SMAX is a person record. And then that has, should we say, two types, either a user or a contact. So a user is someone that can log into SMAX. They can access the portal. If they're given additional roles, they can obviously access the agent interface as well. A contact just exists in the system, and it may be there's someone that may be a contact for a third-party company, and you've got a record in there because you want to be able to trigger sending them an email notification. And you can do that with contacts, but obviously it is just a contact. They can't be part of any groups or have any roles associated with them. In the service request and the out of the box for service request, just like all the other modules within SMAX, we predefine a set number of roles. Now, I'm not going to go into the individual details of those. I think it's fairly straightforward by the names of them, the capabilities that we're including as part of that particular role. And there are some other additional roles, which is, should we say, more generic on the agent side, which could also be utilized for people within your organization. But they're always a good starting point when you maybe have some specific roles or sets that you need to make within your organization. And in terms of the details about those, that can all be found as part of our overall SMAX document space. So I'm including the links here to our SaaS docs and the direct link to the service request management section, where a lot of the content that I've been talking here today is available with a lot more detail, including details on all the fields and forms that are available as part of the service request management module. Similarly, I've also linked to our key concept section within the Docs portal, which talks about request management and request flows and gives a bit more detail on what I've covered there as well. Okay, that's all that I wanted to cover. A little bit longer than a normal session, shall we say, but hopefully we've covered quite a lot in there. I can see a number of questions come in, so I'm going to have a quick look just to see if there's any we can pick off quite quickly, because we are overrunning on our session. Okay, so someone's asked the question about what about UCMDB? It's a good question. UCMDB, or CMS as we refer to it, is part of our ESM tools. It's something that we sell as a separate product, but is typically intertwined with SMAX as part of an installation. And from should we say, our customers that utilize SMAX in our SaaS environments, it's utilizing the same logins and everything else. So it's all set up in that kind of way. Okay, so look at some of the other questions that have come in. Okay, so how do you create a new request type like HR requests? I see you do that and appear in the same list. Okay, so if I understand this question correctly, as I said earlier on, you can't create additional workflows, but HR requests, in the same way as service requests, you can create those as offerings in the catalog. So when you create a new offering, you define that it's going to create either a service, a support, or a HR request, and that allows it to be utilize that process flow. All right, and then from within the agent interface, if you look under the service request module, you'll see them there, and you can use the filters on the views on the grid to be able to separate between them. Okay, so let's have a look. Any other questions that popped up that are not good to answer? Okay. Someone mentioned about not all incidents need to stem from a support request. Am I getting this right? That's correct, yes. So as I said earlier on, incidents, could occur generated for monitoring. They could also be generated maybe by someone within second line. I've done it in the past when I used to work as a second line engineer many years ago at the manufacturing company. And we're particularly going to look at monitoring particular servers, or we'd go look at a server and we'd see an issue in the log file or something whilst we're there, and we'd create an incident for it to start to do some of that initial understanding of what's going on. Okay, I think we've covered a few of those questions. There are a couple more that have been sent through. What we'll do is we'll make sure we collate them and we'll put them later this week into the SMAX portal, so we've got them all documented for you. So with that, we'll move on now. That's the end of today's session. So just a quick reminder, we obviously have the SMAX App Challenge. We're seeing quite a number of people now sign up, which is absolutely brilliant. And likewise, if you are having issues with accessing the SMAX portal, just drop us an email at smaxtember@microfocus.com, and we can make sure that you get that access sorted. A couple of people contacted me today because their activation link from last week had expired, and that is a security policy we have with those activation links, that after 3 days they expire. So if it isn't working and you're getting an unusual request when you try to access or click the link, feel free to drop us a note and we will help solve that for you. Okay, next up, tomorrow, Wednesday, we've got the first of our customer use case sessions. So World Vision, one of our SMAX customers that runs on Micro Focus SaaS, they'll be presenting and talking about their journey with SMAX and some of the cool things that they've done. So with that, I'd like to say thank you all again for joining us on our merry adventure, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.